Now, some would say, look, you're making too much out of sacrifice. You're making way too much out of sacrifice. Proverbs 21:3 says, to do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Yeah, I agree with that. Who's arguing against that? Much, much better that we do right than that we do wrong and then go offer sacrifice. Better that you do the right thing than do the wrong thing and shut yourself in a room to fast and pray and ask for forgiveness. Better do the right thing. Yes, of course. Better to do the right thing than to steal from someone and then go and make restitution 4 times and at great personal sacrifice. No, better to do what's right. Yes, we agree. 1 Samuel 15 teaches that obedience is better than sacrifice. Totally agree. No argument. Here's the question. What happens when we all fall short? What happens when we realize what our sins look like in God's sight? What happens when we realize the magnitude of our guilt in light of his perfect holiness? You know what it reminds me of? When I lived in New York, was in college, it was often very difficult to find a parking space anywhere near the college that I was attending. And I would pray, I'd pray for a spot to open up, I'd drive around, and sometimes you have to go blocks and blocks and blocks away from the school. By the time you're circling and trying to find the spot, then you're late for class, now you're so far away, and it just becomes a vicious cycle. Sometimes I just miss a class over it. And one time I parked somewhere, I didn't realize that there was a sign or some restriction, whatever, and I got a ticket, but I didn't know I got a ticket. You say, how do you know you got a ticket that you didn't know about? Because I found out later through the mail that my license was suspended because I got a ticket that I didn't know I had gotten. Someone may have just pulled it off the car before I ever saw it. So I had to go into court. And I remember it was in the days before everything was computerized and we just look on our cell phone and get all kinds of information. But I remember that I'm sitting there and this judge he was rough. He was rough. One guy came up and he said, sir, I'm here on behalf of my wife. The car had a problem with the brakes and my wife didn't know it. And when she tried to hit the brakes, it didn't work and that's why she went through the red light. It's really not her fault. And I thought, that's a good excuse. That's a fair excuse. And the judge says, what? You let your wife drive a car like that? How dare you? Hit her with the full blast of the law. It's like, ooh. And then there was another guy up there and he said, sir, it was my first violation for driving while intoxicated. It's just, I don't know how it happened. I'm sure it will never happen again. I take this very seriously. And you see the judge is leaning towards mercy. And then somehow his secretary there, she's got access to figures, the early computing information. She's got access to some database. She goes, sir, this is his 12th violation in the last year and a half. License suspended, you're out of, 1 year, remedial training. So what's going on? I'm thinking, I'm just say guilty. I'm guilty. Well, there are only a couple of us left. We're still waiting for our turn. And I'm sitting next to someone. And I thought, well, it's a good opportunity for me to try to share the gospel with him. I didn't know he was a Christian himself. So I said to him, just think of the day we stand before God and we try to tell him, I'm not guilty. I'm not that bad. And he says to me, and God's computer system is going to be a lot more detailed than this one. Oh, don't plan on standing before God and saying, I'm actually a pretty good person. I'm basically righteous. Yeah, my good deeds outweighed my bad. No. Don't plan on that. Because in the sight of a perfect and holy God, we are a very, very fallen, wicked world. And God sees what's in our hearts that no one else sees. So it brings us to the question then of how do we get atonement? How are our sins forgiven? And followers of Yeshua would say ultimately it has to be through blood. Ultimately it must be through blood sacrifice, and it is life for life. The innocent victim, the animal, takes the place of the guilty sinner. And that animal, that sacrificial victim, prefigures, is a prototype of sorts. It prefigures the Messiah who as a spotless lamb would die for the sins of the world.